When Trevor came back to school on Monday, he'd written NY Knicks all over his cast and wouldn't let anybody write anything else. "You ain't messing up the Knicks," he said, standing in the schoolyard like he was the king of it with his broken up arm all crossed and all. "Knicks already messed up," Chris said. "Even the Cavaliers beat them." "Yeah, for the first time in history," Trevor said. "Still got their butts beat. I'm trading all my Knicks cards for Cavaliers. You got any?" Chris took a stack of basketball cards out of his pocket and held them out to Trevor. Trevor scowled down at the cards and said, "Man, you better get out of my face." Lots of people had been mad when the Knicks got beat by the Cavaliers. Even though it was the first time in the history of basketball, people lost their minds. Sean read every single sports page he could get his hands on. "Everything is changing," he'd said, looking a little lost. It snowed all weekend, and the schoolyard looked like something out of a picture. Over where the little kids played, the jungle gym and slide and everything was all covered in white. Later on, they'd come outside and their tiny little feet would leave dirty prints everywhere. But now, it was just beautiful. The sky so bright over everything you had to shield your eyes. I stood there looking up at the sky, thinking about what Sean had said that morning. When we got to the place where he turned off to go to Daffodil, he punched me gently on the shoulder and signed, "I don't care about those girls." But he was lying, and we both knew it. I watched him walk away, all dressed like a Black Panther, but looking a little bit smaller than when we'd left the house that morning. I didn't see the Jesus boy come into the schoolyard until he was standing right near us, his hands in his pockets, his pale face turned up toward the sky, his long hair hanging all curly down his back. He saw me looking and waved. Samantha waved back. The pocks on my palms itched. Whenever I scratched them, I thought about the sign for Jesus, the middle finger of one hand brushing over the palm of the other. Maribel came over to us and stood next to Samantha. I rolled my eyes. She was wearing a new pair of platform boots, the shiny leather kind with the buckle. When I'd asked Mama if I could get them, she'd given me a look and said, "You can't even walk right in flat shoes." "Penny for your thoughts, Jesus boy?" Maribel said. When me and Samantha didn't laugh, she said, "Well, that's all the boy seems to have. He came in with some more on Saturday. They must have a penny garden in their yard or something." "Copper's supposed to be good for dirt," I said. Maribel made a face, but Samantha smiled. Jesus boy walked slowly, his head still kind of lifted a bit. He went and stood by the fence. After a few minutes, Trevor and all of them went over to him. "You still here?" Trevor said. The Jesus boy looked down at his boots. He was wearing a new-looking blue pea coat that was a little too big for him. "You hear brother talking to you?" Trevor said. The Jesus boy looked up again and sort of shrugged. Ray, you think this white cat's—" "Leave him alone, Trev," Ray said, his voice trembling a bit. "He ain't messing with us." "Ray's talking back to Trevor," Maribel whispered. "You know it must be snowing." But Samantha smiled. "He's taking up for Jesus boy. Bible says when Jesus Christ came back, there were miracles everywhere." "Nah," I said. "I think he just lost his mind. He was always a little bit crazy, so it's not some miracle or anything." Trevor turned to Ray. "I know you ain't trying to tell me what to do now." He tapped his ear with his good hand. "I just know that ain't what I'm hearing." "Why you gotta be so mad all the time, Trev?" Ray said, taking a step back. Trevor was quiet for a moment. He looked a little bit confused. Then he shook his head, laughed, and turned back to the Jesus boy. Me and Samantha and Maribel stood shivering across from them. For some reason, I knew something was coming that I didn't want to see. I saw the way Trevor's face got angry again when he talked to the Jesus boy. I saw the way the other kids were starting to move in closer. "Well, it's just a bit too cold out here for me," I said to Samantha. "I'm heading inside." Just as I started walking away from them, I heard Trevor curse the Jesus boy and tell him to throw up his hands. I turned back then. The one fight I'd ever had was back in 2nd grade. A boy whose name I didn't remember anymore had tried to take the money Mama had given me for an after-school snack. The boy didn't get the money. He'd knocked me down and I'd kicked him hard in the knee. I didn't like fighting, not seeing them, not having them. After I'd had that fight, even though nothing really hurt and I still had my money, I cried and cried and cried. Jesus Boy stood there. He had a long red string of licorice wrapped around his finger. "Why do you want to fight me, Trevor?" he said, then put the licorice in his mouth and chewed slowly, not taking his eyes off of him. "Is it because I have a daddy and you don't?" I stopped dead. Nobody talked about Trevor's daddy. The whole schoolyard seemed to get quiet. Some of the kids said, "Ooh." "I know this cat ain't say what I thought he said." Trevor took a step closer to the Jesus Boy. "You heard me right," the Jesus Boy said quietly, but there was a hardness inside the quiet that made me shiver even more. I watched the Jesus Boy's face. It seemed so calm, like it knew some next thing was coming and was more than ready for it. "White boy, you must—" "I ain't your white boy," the Jesus Boy said. "You colorblind?" He stepped away from the fence, a step closer to Trevor. Trevor didn't back up, though. I took a deep breath. I couldn't believe he was standing up there, trying to tell them he wasn't white. Even if he did have a brown daddy, there wasn't anything about him that looked not white. "Yeah," Chris said. "He's spirit-colored. Ain't that right, Ray Ray?" Ray Ray just stared at the Jesus Boy like the rest of us, trying to find the not white part of him. Standing there in the snow, with all those kids standing around, it came to me. His calmness, his hair, the paleness of his skin. He'd always had to walk through the world this way, push through. Maybe he'd met a whole bunch of Trevors in his life. Maybe he'd go on meeting them. "My mama isn't white, and my daddy isn't white, and as far as I know it, you're the one with the white daddy living across the highway." He took another step toward Trevor, but even as he said those words, his voice stayed quiet. But then I looked at his hand, watched it close into a fist. "I saw his daddy on Saturday," I whispered to Samantha. "He's brown like us, not even light-skinned." Samantha's eyes went wide. Then she frowned, trying to figure it out. "I bet that isn't his real father," she said after a while. "The way Joseph wasn't really Jesus' father." "Girl," Maribel said, "this world is just too many things." "Okay, Miss Parrot," I said. "Did you hear your mama or your grandma say that?" "I heard your mama say it." "Don't talk about my mama," I said. "Shh, y'all," Samantha said. "Enough fights in this schoolyard already." She closed her eyes a moment, and I knew it was to pray silently. When she opened them again, the Jesus Boy hand was still in a fist, opening and closing, opening and closing. I looked at Trevor standing there, his face looking like it was trying to figure out what to do next. I looked at his broken arm, at the cast climbing all the way up to his shoulder, at the way his too small coat couldn't quite cover it. The fence in the park faced the highway. Maybe he'd hoped he could jump and keep on jumping, through the sky and across the highway, on, until he landed right back in his daddy's arms. And maybe, because Trevor didn't have anything to say back to the Jesus Boy, maybe that's why he took a swing at him with that one good arm, missing and stumbling, then falling. And maybe, because Trevor had always been on the evil side, maybe that's why kids starting laughing when he fell, instead of running to him and helping him up out of the snow. "You crying, man?" Ray Ray said. He looked confused and surprised. He was standing just a few feet away from his friend. But he didn't move toward Trevor, didn't try to lift him up out of the snow. "I can't believe you're crying." "I ain't crying." I went to Trevor. The minute I saw him falling, I went toward him. It was automatic. Something inside me just said, "Go." And I did, because Trevor was falling and then he was in the snow. And in the snow, he looked smaller and weaker and more human than any of us. When I looked up, the Jesus Boy was on the other side of me, and we were both lifting Trevor even as he tried to shake us off him and keep from crying. Then Trevor was standing again, standing but cursing both of us, but his curse words sounded strange, hollow, and far away, like he was just learning them, like he was practicing at being some kind of tough kid instead of truly being one. Then he just stopped cursing and stood there, his head hanging down, his one good hand in his pocket. He didn't look like Trevor anymore, standing there all pale and sad and shivering. He looked like he was somebody else.